We're looking at ways, biblical ways, to resolve conflict in our relationships. It's so easy not to do anything and just walk away from our problems. But if we walk away, those problems will never get resolved. The Bible reveals the root of every conflict. Proverbs 13:10 says, "Only by pride comes contention." Anytime there is contention in a relationship, anytime there's conflict in a marriage, pride is the underlying issue that needs to be addressed. Pride destroys marriages and families. Pride is unteachable and uncorrectable. Pride refuses to take responsibility and is very quick to blame others for their circumstances and their problems. We blame our church. We blame our spouse and other family members. I heard one pastor say, "I could be a great pastor if it wasn't for my congregation." Or the dad that said, "I could be a great father if it wasn't for my kids." But the prize has to go to the man who said, "I could be a great husband if it wasn't for my wife." But God places the responsibility right back on our shoulder. And if there is ever going to be any hope of restoring broken relationships, we need to take full responsibility for our own sinful actions. As long as we're focusing on the offenses of others, our conflicts will never get resolved. And we need to be careful to examine our own sinful hearts. Now, certainly there may be more fault on one side than there is on the other, but virtually always there is some fault on both sides. Maybe you're only 5% responsible and your spouse or some other family member shares 95% of the blame. Don't focus on that other person. That's their problem. That's their responsibility, and God will hold them accountable for that. Focus instead on your own wrong actions and words and attitudes that make up that 5%, and start taking ownership and responsibility for how you contributed to the conflict. If there's ever going to be any hope of restoring broken relationships, we need to take personal responsibility. As long as we're focusing on the offenses of others, those conflicts will never get resolved. And good relationships are not built by two people who never do anything wrong. Good relationships are built by people who aren't too proud to admit when they are wrong, and they try to make it right. Often when our children were younger and got into a disagreement, they would say, "Johnny did this," or "Rachel did that," and they wanted to blame their brother or sister, but we would say to them, "What did you do?" pressing them to take personal responsibility. Regardless of what the other person has done, we need to take responsibility and acknowledge our own wrong actions and words and attitudes. Don't wait for the other person to make it right. It may never happen. But have the courage and strength of character to be willing to deal with that pride and humble yourself and go to that person with whom you're having the conflict, and without mentioning their offenses, just humbly and meekly take responsibility for your own. You know, most conflicts can be resolved right at this point. This is the starting point for rebuilding a broken relationship. There are 8 words that every married person ought to learn to say regularly. "I was wrong. Will you please forgive me?" It's amazing how many times all it takes is for someone to take full responsibility for their own sin, and God will begin to heal the hurts and bitterness and restore that broken relationship. Some of the most successful marriages and families are not those that don't have any problems, but some of the most successful marriages are those that ask each other's forgiveness several times each week. God wants us to deal with pride. He wants us to humble ourselves. And through that demonstration of humility, He will bind and knit our hearts together.